Hey everyone. Good afternoon, evening-ish. I don't know, I think it's nearly pub time, isn't it? If it's not already, sorry. No one's sorrier than me, probably. So hello everyone, my name is Jimmy. You can find me at Twitter at @jbogard. All the code and stuff that I'll be showing today, you can find on my GitHub as well, at github.com/jbogard. And I blog quite a bit. Probably not as much as I used to, I guess, at jimmybogard.com. And you can also find a lot of old blog posts, a few hundred of them actually, on my old Los Techies site, which is jimmybogard.lostechies.com. Some of you probably use some of my open source libraries, for which I am deeply sorry of the bugs and problems that I've given you over the years. So today I want to talk some about continuous delivery in Azure, especially looking past the kind of demoware you typically see from Microsoft presentations. They do file new project and they right-click the project in Visual Studio and they do deploy and everyone's clapping in the audience. And then you go to actually do it back in your company at home and you realize, oh crap, it's actually a lot harder than that. There's a lot more things going on. What I wanted to do is to walk through some of the options that we have available for us for building continuous delivery pipelines in Azure. I'm actually going to start with the very simplest option, actually going from right-click deploy and taking a real application all the way from that kind of deployment to like ludicrous speed and see what we can do with that. So let's look at some of the deployment options that actually exist in Azure. So the first one that does exist is that right-click deploy out of Azure. Has anyone ever used that before, like actually in production? Shame, shame. No. I actually have used this before, especially with smaller applications or things of just trying to get up and going and just push out there somewhere. So it is a valid deployment scenario. It is that kind of right-click deploy experience outside of Visual Studio. It works not only with just kind of web apps, but there are a lot of different Azure applications that you can deploy right out of there. It uses a technology called web deploy, even though it can deploy other things besides websites, but the name kind of stuck, so that's what it is. Behind the scenes, it does use PowerShell scripts and PowerShell commandlets, so there are options inside of Visual Studio to say, show me the actual script behind the scenes, and you're going to see the PowerShell script that actually runs and does these deployments. But the demos you always see, right, are Visual Studio, right-click, deploy, everyone's cheering, confetti from the ceiling, all that sort of stuff. The next option that they have available to you is something called continuous deployment. This is not something that Microsoft invented. It is actually something that has existed for quite a while. The idea behind this is my deployments happen directly from some sort of source control. So every time I push my code up to some source control, then the production deployments happens straight from whatever that thing is. Has anyone here ever used Heroku before? Just me, a few of us. So Heroku popularized this idea that I just have a single repository of my source code, and whenever I push my source code up, it's going to deploy whatever's in there, which works really great if you never write code that breaks, like myself. But the idea is that if you have simple websites, then they don't have a lot going on, but it's still like an actual application, and you have source control behind it, then this kind of deployment works for you. And they call this one continuous deployment. Microsoft's options for this, which we'll see, can connect to a lot of different kind of source control providers. But when you start to have more complex things going on, you don't have really a lot of hooks for yourself. So it works really well for really self-contained applications that have the entire ecosystem in that application. But once you start getting anything more complicated than that, this tends to fall down. Past this, we actually have to build an actual continuous integration and continuous delivery pipeline. So this would entail us having some kind of continuous integration build. This integration build would still be hooked off of source control, but it would compile our application, run both tests that we've written, except for the other one that we commented out because it keeps failing for some reason. And then at the end of the build process, out comes some kind of package that wraps everything up together into one single thing that can then get deployed. And then there's something else that will take that package and push it out into different environments, whether it's just production environment, or perhaps we have an entire set of different environments that this gets pushed out to. And the final one, this was a kind of a new one, the kind of holy grail of continuous delivery pipeline, come in this form of templates in Azure. This is not also something new that Microsoft created, if anyone here has ever used a tool called Terraform, Terraform also has this idea of describing in some sort of format my different environments that I have. In Azure, this comes in the form of Azure Resource Manager, and so these are JSON templates that describe what my infrastructure should look like. And then alongside of that is some tooling that says, make my environment look exactly like this. And so whenever I run these Azure Resource Manager tools, it will change the configuration of my production environment to match whatever that document looks like. So if you enjoy working with JSON, Azure Resource Templates are a great tool for you. One other cool thing about these templates is they can introduce the concept of variables. So a lot of times what we do with our customers is we have a product that we may be building, and that product has to be deployed to individual customers' environments. So we can templatize some things as part of those templates, or introduce variables as part of them, so that when I try to deploy those templates to those individual customers' environments, we can swap out things like the connection string information, maybe servers are different, but we have an overall template of what that environment looks like, minus some customer-specific things. So it starts out with something very simple, just like right-click Publish out of Visual Studio, and it can get very complicated as you want to, all the way to this kind of holy grail of infrastructure as code, where instead of me having a bunch of settings hidden in some crazy single-page application in the Azure portal, we can have our actual entire production environment represented as some configuration file that we can even put inside of source control. So what I want to do is take an application from that very top bubble there and walk it through the steps of what it would look like to move it down all the way down to this kind of holy grail nirvana at the bottom of using templates to describe and define what our entire ecosystem looks like. Does that sound good? That's my last slide, except for this slide which just says demo. Okay. So let me switch over to a mirror display so I don't have to keep looking behind me. And we'll give Parallels about 30 minutes to figure out the resolution here. Oh, that was quicker than it usually goes. OK. So what I have right now is a sample application that I've built up over the years. It started out with the sample application from Microsoft, the Contoso University Entity Framework 6 MVC application. But this is an application that's more or less built the way I tend to build applications. So it actually does have tests as part of it as well. And they do run, actually. And behind the scenes, it actually does have a real database. Most of the time when I see Microsoft demoing these kinds of right-click deploy, it's just a static website, so there's nothing really else going on. But this does have an actual database behind the scenes, and that will introduce some complications when it comes to building our deployments. So let me run it. You probably have seen this application before many times, at least I have, for probably the past 3 or 4 years. This is an Asp Net Core application, Asp Net Core 1.1, because I know 2.0 dropped yesterday, but I'm not crazy. I'm going to upgrade my system in the day I'm doing a demo. I have done that before. It was a very bad idea. So this is an Asp Net Core application with targeting the full .NET framework using Entity Framework 6 to do its data access. So it is a fully functioning application. I can go like edit someone's information. I don't know why their name isn't like that, but that's what it is now. And so yes, it actually does work. It is actually connecting to a real database behind the scenes. So I built this application myself. I'm super proud of it. And now I'm ready to go to production. So I've watched all the Microsoft videos. And what do they say to do? They tell me to right-click and publish. So let's publish this application out to our Azure, at least my Azure account here. So I'm going to create a completely new Microsoft Azure App Service. This used to be called Azure Websites and Azure Web Applications. Now this is the 4th or 5th name for it, Azure App Service. Why not? And let's hit publish. And these days, we actually do have Australia-based resource groups and Australia-based Azure data centers. So we don't have to, I don't have to deploy this 12,000 miles away, or how many kilometers, like several hundred kilometers away, I guess. I'm not good with math. All right, so I'm going to do this on my subscription, and I'm not going to go to this, whatever this resource group is here. I'm going to create a new resource group. And I'm not very creative, so let's just have the same name. We're going to see this resource group come up over and over again, so pay attention to what you're doing with those resource groups, because when we start to do Azure Resource Manager, probably got clued in there, the name resource will come back when we start scripting these pieces out. And the app service plan, let me pick a new one, and we'll go as free can be. Location, South Central US, probably not a good idea for us here. So let me go up to Australia East or Southeast. This is more Southeast, right? Is it, oh, East, okay. East. What's Southeast? Melbourne, okay. Okay. Okay, so all of these other ones cost money, of which I don't have very much, so let's go all the way top to the free. That one sounds like a good one to do. So we'll do the free size, click OK, and everything looks good. Let's go ahead and hit Create. Now, of course, this is going to create all of those Azure pieces behind the scenes. It's going to create the Azure resource, which is kind of a named container for a lot of different Azure applications and services. Azure resources also allow me to provide security for a specific group of applications. And it's also going to be creating the actual Azure website for us that's going to deploy out to. And all of this configuration that I've just done here is going to live as part of my project here. While this is going, I'll go ahead and pull that up. And if I go look into the source code of my project, I go to Source, into the Properties folder. We'll see a Publish Profiles folder here. And that's where the configuration that I just selected all those pieces will live. Oop. So if I look inside of here, we can see some XML files. So if in an environment where I probably have source control, I'd probably push those items up there to source control so they don't just live on my individual laptop here. Let me zoom in a little bit. It's telling me I need to control mouse wheel up, but there's no mouse wheel here. So let's see. Does this work? Nope. 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 None of those works. So let's zoom in a little bit. Control num plus. Yeah, there's no num key on here. OK, so this is all the configuration they did for that through that user interface, along with some other pieces that you didn't see through that UI. So things like the resource group name, we said it was Contoso University-NDC Sydney, so that's the resource name it has there. It's going to be using the Azure website publish provider. So if I have other kinds of things I can publish through here, that would be a different provider. And some other junk, but I don't know what it means. All right, so it said it published the application. So it popped open this Microsoft Edge window because I'm legally obligated to use Microsoft Edge in these conferences, I think, part of my MVP status. And at some point, we should see our beautiful website come up, right? I should have chose like maybe not the free tier because I'm competing with everyone else that's building all these free applications. So who thinks this website is going to work? Oh, crap. Usually it takes a lot longer with this. OK, so it didn't work. Why didn't it work? Database. Oh, the database. So I pushed up just the code part of the application, but there's an actual database behind the scenes that this is supposed to be talking to. Behind this, if I want to see what database it was trying to talk to, I could go over here to see my configuration for the connection string. And it tells me it's trying to access MS SQL Local DB, SQL Local Database, which doesn't exist in Azure websites, so this is just not going to work. So what can I do? There are ways for me to have like SQLite local databases inside of this application, but those are all like horribly broken and don't really work very well. I'm trying to build a real enterprise application, so I should have an actual database. So that means we have to go back to our favorite user interface, The user interface, they reinvented the scroll. So you thought you just needed to scroll up and down. No, you get to scroll left and right now. So let's go ahead and create a database for ourselves. All right, so I'm going to add a new database for this application. And again, because I'm not very creative, I'm just going to call it the same name as everything else. And the resource group, I want it to be part of that existing resource group as everything else. That one. The select a source, a blank database, sample adventure works, which I don't think anyone ever picks that option, or a backup. The backup, though, has to also exist in Azure, so that's not going to work for me. This is a totally new database. So I'll pick blank database and the server. I have to actually configure a server as well. This database has to execute somewhere. So I'll go ahead and say, yep, same name as it was before. Server admin login will be SA. No. Uh-oh. Will be, there we go, just my typical name. And the password will be super secret. That same thing again. This right here. This is all IP restricted, so don't worry, you can't go crash my database. And the location should probably be in the same location as everything else, assuming I want to not have this thing totally perform horribly. So Australia East, and the last part I need to select a pricing tier, which of course I don't want this one. I don't have that much money in this. I want to go to the very basic one, the smallest one. This is kind of like SQL Express for the cloud, the basic one. It's still not free though, unfortunately. It does cost us something. All right. So this will create a completely blank database. However, I still need to actually give it the schema and data as part of it. If I ran it now, yes, it could connect to it, but it would not be able to get any information out because it's, again, a completely blank database. All right. Now is the point in the demo where I click refresh, and you watch me click refresh, waiting for this thing to come up. Uh-oh, nope, not there yet. Maybe again, maybe this time. Okay. So I need to fill that database with something. As part of my application, I do have an initial schema and data as part of it. If using any framework too, it has that idea of migrations as part of the code. None of my clients ever let me use that, so I'm not going to do that as part of this demo. And they don't let me have an application when it runs just decide to start changing the schema of my system. That's never. Has anyone actually had a DBA that's let them do that? Oh wow, that's amazing. Mine don't. Okay, so let's see. Is this? Still waiting. Still waiting. But while that's going, I can go ahead and pull up the script I need to use to run and actually fill up the database with schema and data. And that's the one we have right here. All right, so I can go ahead and let me copy everything we have here. And maybe it's back again. Oh, hooray, we have a database. All right. Confetti from the ceiling. All right, so in this database, we need to create the initial schema, create the data as part of it, and the lovely right scrolling interface of Azure lets us execute scripts directly in the browser. Not scary at all. This brings SQL injection to a whole new level here that I can do this. Okay, so I need to log into this as J Bogard. Oh, and I need to give it that super secret password I had before. Yes. All right, I'm authenticated, and now I can go ahead and pull up my script and paste it in, run it, and now my database has some data. Run it. Run it. Hello. I think I've really annoyed it now. Oh, here we go. It's just, there we go. Run. Run. When in doubt, refresh. It certainly can be that I'm running parallels on a Mac trying to run Azure through that. That's definitely not what's wrong here. All right, let's try this again. Get that and use the tools and query editor. Now I could connect through Management Studio or Visual Studio to do this. What we'll need to do in the future, though, is to open up a firewall exception to allow this laptop to connect. So I'll do that right after this. And let me copy in that super secret password again. And my full script. And are we having fun? Hey, now something's happening. OK, so after I run the script, now I should be able to go back to my web application I deployed, hit refresh, and it should work. Hit refresh, and it should work. Hey, oh, no, right. My connection string is wrong. What happened there? Oh, because in my app settings, over here, it's still pointing to SQL local database. So more right-clicking and more scrolling to the right in Azure to get our connection string corrected here. So back over in Azure, I can go to my, oops. Oh, yeah, I don't care about these. I'll go to the web application I just created right here. And there will be a section here to load up the application settings. And so I will paste in the application settings right here the connection string to connect to that individual database. So down here, there we are. Alongside my website Node default version, which I didn't know I was running Node, I need to put in the key here. So back in my application settings, I know it's data, default connection, connection string. So I'll need to do something similar here where I have data, colon, default connection, colon, connection string. And I have cheated by typing out the connection string earlier. And let's go ahead and paste that in here. And hit save. Now will it work? I don't know, actually. Let's find out. All right, so I've created a database, filled it with the default schema and data, changed my connection string in the application settings so that my application now points to the correct database. And that was a lot more complicated than right-click deploy, wasn't it? As soon as I have that database, that's when things start to get more complicated for my application. And that's one of the things I want to show here is that, yeah, things are super simple if it's just a static website. But as soon as I have a database, which I think every single one of my web applications does, it's going to get a little bit more complicated here. Really shouldn't have picked the free tier because this is going to take forever. So while this is coming up, we can talk about different ways for me to then take this application and move it to more interesting deployments. Oh, it worked. All right, so let me go try to edit something. All right. And click Edit and change this poor person's name to something else. And hooray, my cloud deployed application has a database that actually works. Yay. Yay. OK, so my Contosha University core is starting to become more and more popular to the point where I can't do all the changes by myself. I need to have to start having different teams help me out to be able to build and deploy my application. Now, we can all keep working off my one shared drive on my laptop for all that shared code. And whenever someone changes something that needs to go to production, each individual developer can right-click deploy. But that's crazy talk. Let's not do that. Instead, what we want to do is introduce source control as part of that to have all of our shared changes together. Now, I've already set up the source control here. I'm hosting all of this on GitHub. but I could have hosted on Bitbucket or VSTest or anything like that. So what I want to do is now hook up the deployment of this application to GitHub so that whenever I push changes up into GitHub, my application then goes and gets updated. So more right-clicking in Azure to set all this up. So in my web application here, I can go to the continuous, over here, the deployment quick starts. Oh, no, deployment options, that's the one. I'm going to set up Git-based deployment. And the idea here is that anytime I push my code up to some source control provider, the Azure detects that I've made that change and will go ahead and deploy those new changes to production. So I can say, oh, I'm on GitHub. And this is off my personal account, so choose organization, J Bogard. Choose the project. I want to choose my NDC Sydney CI/CD example here. The branch is master, because that's the only thing I know how to do. And I will click OK. All right, so of course, more, just like everything else in Azure, more spinny GIFs and little dots to tell me that everything's going here. Oh, it's successfully set up the deployment source. That was much faster than I thought it was going to go. So let's go ahead and make a change locally, commit that change, push it up, and watch that in production. So first of all, let's just make sure everything's still working OK locally. So I'm going to run the application again. We'll make a change to our local application, make sure that it's not any different in production, and then I will go ahead and push those changes up and watch Azure figure it out and then start to make that change. All right, so this one, I don't like the title of the project here. It says Contoso University Core. That's boring. Let's make it more exciting. So I'll go to my layout and change the title from Contoso University Core to down here. There we are. NDC Sydney. Oh, I can't spell it right. 2017. All right, so I can save that. I go and refresh here, and we should see the title up at the top change to NDC 2017. I pull in the product owner, I pull in my users. Everyone agrees that they love that title, they're ready to ship. Let's get it going. So I will go ahead and commit those changes. Give it a good commit message like awesome title. And I will go ahead and push. All right, so I'm pushing those changes up. Azure is going to detect that I've pushed those changes and something's changed in the repository on the master branch. So back over in Azure, we can see that it's actually starting to synchronize. It actually hasn't quite detected that new change yet, so we'll let this figure it out. Right now, it's actually building the current version in master, but I might just kill this and say build something new. Sync, yes. So what is this doing? It does actually have to build the application. It can't just take my raw code and stick that into Azure. It does have to actually compile the application. Now, it has detected what kind of application this is, so you can't just really throw any code up there and expect it to work. It does know that I have a web application as part of that, and so it's going to deploy that web application inside of there into production. This doesn't take usually terribly long. Usually takes just a minute or so for it to detect this and pull it up. But if I want to force it, I can just use this little sync button, and it'll force it to make those synchronization changes. Now, this kind of Git-based deployment, there are some hooks that we can have as part of that if we want to do things as part of our deployment. Oh, there we go. Awesome title. So detected the next one. It's going to do that next one right now. So it can do some kind of, it does have some level of deployment hooks. It does have some level of build hooks, but you can imagine it's not that extensible. So it doesn't do things like run all my tests. It doesn't do things like any kind of build script or anything like that. It literally is compiling my application. Just every time I push, it's going to go straight into production. Okay, so it says my awesome title version is now there. You can do things like deploy older versions. So if you want to go back in time, you can say redeploy this older version if you want to. Let me go back to, okay, this is the old version. If I refresh now, we should see this title up top now change from Contoso University Core to NDC 2017, NDC Sydney 2017. Now again, I didn't choose the nice version of this. This is the free version, so it has to compete with everything else to spin up and start going. If you have the higher level versions of your website, this doesn't take so terribly long to load up. But I'm cheap. I don't have that many credits, so we'll have to stare at the little spinner while it's waiting. I'm sorry? So the question was, will it override the connection string configuration? No, it won't, because that just lives in that very hidden spot inside the Azure UI. So for those of you that are familiar with Azure, it's this game of whack-a-mole. What did I set? I don't know. It's hidden somewhere in these right-scrolling user interfaces. So that one is one that I set. Even though I deployed a new version of the application, those settings that I put inside of the Azure website still stay there. They don't get overwritten by what I've done. They're deployed the application, and then on top of that are my other configuration. Now, we are using Asp Net Core. So Asp Net Core has a number of different configuration configuration providers. So this one, for example, I have configured to do, no, that's the wrong way. Wrong way. Whoa, okay. All right, this is why I don't like control scroll. We also are pulling from environment variables, so it's not actually changing the file on disk. It's setting up some environment variables, and my Asp Net Core application is then set up to read those environment variables. So it's not actually fiddling with the code bits like we might think. Okay, so that's a very boring kind of change we've made here, which is just change the title of something. I want to do something a little bit more interesting. So we had this database, right, that is behind the scenes. And one of the more difficult problems I have to solve in changing an application over time is what happens, what do I do when I need to make changes to my database? So that's the next thing I want to do is make a substantial change in my application where I have to add new schema and add some new inputs to my screens, add new outputs to my screens. And let's try to get that change all the way to production. So I look at my application now, and in my current user information, the student and instructors only have last name and first name. So what I want to do is add middle name to my schema and to my application. So let's do that together. I'm using Entity Framework, so there's probably some kind of base object where I need to add that field to the screen. So over here, I've got last name, first, mid name, even though it's just first name everywhere else in the application. So I'm going to add in here a middle name. Okay, that just added it to my Entity Framework object. So that's not going to actually change anything in the database, nor is it going to add it to the screen. So the next thing I want to do is to add that editing ability to the different screens that I have. So I want to have it show up on the edit screen, and I also want it to show up in the detail screen. Have middle name show up there. So I have that as part of my application. Let's see, that's on the student side. So in the edit screen, I'm going to add middle name to the view model. Oops. And I'll add it to the view. So down here where I have a form block for last name, first middle name, let's add one in the middle here for middle name. And on the details screen, I want to do the same kind of operation. Add it to my view model here. And add it to the screen here. First mid name. I don't know what this DTDD stuff means. It was just in the HTML that they made, so don't ask me about that. All right, so last name, first mid name. So right here, we'll do middle name. All right. Now this isn't actually going to work, is it? I haven't changed anything in the database. So at this point, I need to make a decision. How am I going to get these database changes not only on my box, but also in production and all the other different developers that are working on this application? There are a few different ways that are out there to perform this kind of change across all these different environments. The one I like the most these days are database migrations. Database migrations allow us to take a snapshot of a database, identify that version in time, and then as I'm making changes to the database, additional scripts that migrate the schema from one version to the next, I add to the actual source control and deploy those scripts as part of any kind of deployment. Now, Entity Framework has this built in through code-based migrations. I've never been successful in getting those to be able to be done via with DBAs involved. The other way I see people typically do this are through SQL database projects, which are the scourge of the earth. Well, maybe there's another one in the States right now, but it's the second most scourge of the earth right now, besides King Cheeto. In those kind of deployments, the SQL database project, the DAC pack way of doing things, what those do is you have your own definition of the database in some kind of format in source control. And then when you go to production and you go to a different environment, at that point in time is going to take a diff between those two different schemas. It's going to try to figure out how to map that schema that is the version that you want to the version that exists right now. And most of the time that works okay, except in cases where I need to do things like script migrations. So if I need to actually migrate data from one point to the next, or if there's like more complicated changes that happen, maybe I've renamed tables or I've renamed columns and things like that. It's not so smart about doing those sort of things. And so it introduces the chance and the possibility that I need to have some kind of manual intervention in deployment. I do not want any manual intervention in my deployments. I don't want to be called at 10 o'clock at night like, hey, the database isn't deploying. Can you please tell us what you actually did? I don't want that. So I'm going to use a SQL-based way of doing my migrations. SQL-based way of doing migrations means my DBAs are happy because they can see the SQL that's going to run before it runs. And migrations so that I can easily upgrade any database over time without worrying about things breaking. The tool I'm going to use to do so is a tool called Roundhouse. It's a console application. And for this one, I need to create a new migration script for adding this new middle name column. The way all database migration scripts work is they have some kind of ordering of the migrations over time. And the way you do the ordering kind of depends on the way the different migration tools. Entity Framework, you may have noticed, has this like time-stamped file-based way of doing things. And the way ours works is very similar. It just like literally orders the file by name and will check each of those scripts to see if they need to be run. So what I have right now, in this case I have it in an app data folder, is a single folder called run after create database, and it has that initial schema and data file that I used in my production database. The idea here is that there's typically in my systems there's already some sort of initial schema in my databases, and so I don't want it to try to run that script because everything's already there. But for new databases, let's say for local development environments or new testing environments, I want that script to be run. So that's what this folder says is if I'm going to create a database, go ahead and run this script after you create it. Separate from that are going to be actual migration scripts, and those come in a new folder that has a special name called up. up. So inside of here, I'm going to create the new script that will represent migrating my schema from the way it is right now to the way I want it to be. So essentially, this is going to be an alter table, add that column script. There's a lot of different ways you can generate this script. You can go on Management Studio, make the change, and say create script. Or if you're like me or you're SQL Ninja, then you can create it yourself. So let me just do add new item. And SQL script doesn't exist in anywhere here, so I'm just going to click text file, but I'm going to name it in a special format. So this is the very first one, so I'm going to prefix it with a number. You can do a number, you can do a timestamp as well. I've seen that very often done as well. So you have to have a year, month, day, hour, minute, seconds to ensure that there's that ordering. Or you can just do numerical, that also works as well. So I also give it a meaningful name, add middle name. .SQL. All right. Before I do so, I want to just call it something else, .text. I want to actually introduce SQL migrations to my overall build environment. So over here, I've got a build script, this build.ps1, that right now just does some very simple things like run .NET restore, .NET build, .NET test, and .NET test. So it actually does run the test. So if I run this build right now, build, it'll just compile the application and run some tests. Now what I want it to do is run my migrations before it does anything else in the application. The idea is that I can give this repository to any new developer on our team. They run the build script, and their entire local environment is set up and ready to go. So we call this, in my company, time to login screen. How long from when a developer pulls down the code can they run it and see that initial login screen? And ideally, it's at like 5 minutes or less. Just like pull the code down, run the build, hit F5, and you're good to go. Now, we can only really do this easily if I can have this local environment where I have my database up and going. So I will run my roundhouse tool, which I have as an executable just inside my repository, this rh.exe. And I'm going to give it some commands to migrate some of my different databases. So I, on my team, always have local development databases because shared development databases is also crazy. So I have this local one here that I can run against. And I tell it the folder I want it to run my migration scripts from. That's this next argument right here. And then, of course, I actually have to tell it what server to go against. So I'm just going to run against SQL local database. There's a ton of options in Roundhouse. You can do things like restore from a backup first before you do any migrations. You can wipe the database and then build it from scratch. That's what the next two ones do, where it drops the database and it's going to run some simple migrations against just the normal migrations. So my test database always starts out from a clean slate. And now with that all ready, did my tests fail? Yes, why did my tests fail? The database isn't migrated yet. So let's actually run that migration. We got some new green stuff here going. That's the piece that's actually going to be running those migration scripts against my database. And the way that works behind the scenes, let me pull up Management Studio. And if I look at my database right now, you'll see the normal kind of the normal tables that existed as part of my application. If I refresh this table list after migrations have run, we'll see some new tables pop up. Down here under the Roundhouse schema, I have 3 new tables. Scripts run is errors, so if there's something that went wrong, and a version table. And if I go look inside the scripts run, select top 1,000 rows, I don't think I'll actually see anything here yet because there's no migration scripts that I've included. Nope, nothing is part of that yet. So my script, as it's going, it's probably going to fail my integration tests because that column doesn't exist. So let's go over here to our migration script. I did text at the end so it wouldn't get picked up. I'll rename it back to .SQL. And, yes, change. Let's go ahead and make a script here. I may or may not need some help here from the audience on what I need to write. Alter table, person, add column, middle name. Nope, no column, it's red. And just kidding, in varchar. We're not crazy. Okay, so I've created this script that migrates my database. I'm not going to run it myself, though. I'm going to allow the tool to run it for me. So let's go back over here, rerun my build, and it'll just blast past it. But it'll actually run that script. Now, if it errors out, it'll tell me, but I did the SQL right the first time, I think. Whew. All right, so it's going to go ahead and run it. If I go back over now to my database and go look to see what scripts are run, we actually get a value back now here. It says, oh, it has this script called add middle name. Here's the actual text of the script. Here's an interesting part. It actually hashes the file. So if you change it, it'll barf at you saying, someone changed the file. I don't know what happened. Fix it, please. And if I go to my person table, we should now see a middle name column. Yay. Allegedly, my test will pass now, too. Yes, test passed. All right, so my build is successful. I should be able to run my application now. And that new edit field on my middle name should now show up here, I think. So go over to students and edit. Look at the details of this person. Middle name is blank, so I can go edit their middle name. And back to the details. And yay, middle name is there. We made a substantial change to my application, and everything is good and well in the world. Except I need to deploy this to production. But now I've got this database change I have to do. How do I make sure that actually happens in production? Do I go log into the database server and manually fiddle the bits to add that column there? Probably not. That's probably not what we want to do. So what I'm going to introduce to this system is the third way of building and deploying my applications, which is an actual CI/CD pipeline. I'm going to introduce continuous integration, so it will build my application, run tests, and create a package for me. And on the continuous deployment side, I'm going to introduce an actual automated deployer that will take my package and deploy it out into production. Sound good? Yeah. OK, let's go. OK, so my current CI tool of choice for me personally today in .NET applications is AppVeyor. AppVeyor is a cloud-based continuous integration tool that uses configuration files that are inside my source control to define exactly what my build should be. And anytime I have those kinds of things in source control, I feel a lot better about life. It's just one less thing that's in some user interface locked away somewhere else. So I'm going to add, as part of this, let's just leave this here. I'm going to connect up my new repository up to AppVeyor. So down here, I've got my NDC Sydney CI/CD. That's the one I want. Add. All right, so now I've added a build to my application, but nothing is configured yet. So let's see how we can do that. The first thing I have is my AppVeyor YAML file. So what does YAML stand for? Yet another markup language? Yes. So this is the instructions to AppVeyor and how to build my application. So what I'm telling it is a few things. One is how to do the version number. So it's 1.0.thebuild. And that information that can then be used in my build script to do assembly versioning. I'm going to tell what image to use. Visual Studio 2017 is a specific build image to build against. They have a dozen or so different ones. I tell the build script I want to use, this build.ps1. And then the last important thing here is what artifacts exist as part of the output of my application. So I'm telling it I'm going to create an artifacts folder or look in the artifacts folder for NuGet packages. And over my build, I want to actually create NuGet packages as part of building my application. So that's what I have here. I'm now going to publish my application to a folder, this publish folder. And so that's going to strip away all the C# files and all that junk we really don't want to have deployed as part of our application. And the final thing I'm going to use is a tool from Octopus Deploy to package my application into a NuGet package. This NuGet package, I'm going to say to put it in the artifacts folder. And now, AppFair is going to look in that artifacts folder after my build is done for the NuGet package. One last thing I need to do is a bit of cheat code, which is to tell the publish command for .NET some additional files I wanted to have published. So down here at the bottom, my cheat code, there's some additional things I want to include as part of that final package. So I want to include all of those migration scripts, those SQL files. I'm actually going to deploy them to production, but this time in a special app data folder that no one can see. I also have a deploy script, which we'll look at here in a second, and the roundhouse executable tool that will execute whenever I actually execute my deployment in production. But we'll get to that here in a second. Let's just make sure I can build this application, push it up to production, and have it actually all run. Sound good? All right. So I go ahead and commit all my changes and push it up. And if I go back to AppFair, we should see this in a second, detect those changes, and then now start to build. Yep, there we go, AppFair. So I'm also in the free version of AppFair, which means I'm going to be also in a queued shared resource pool of build agents. What time is it in the States? 3:30 in the morning, I think we're okay. There's no one building over there, so we should be, oh, here we go, queued up right away. In my actual work environment, we do pay for build servers to make sure that I have those dedicated resources to run these builds. But for this, we'll just go ahead and use all the free versions because I don't feel like paying for it myself. OK, so what is this doing for us behind the scenes? We've told AppFair, this is the build script I want to run. So it's just going to take that exact build.ps1 and execute it for us. This is important to me because I want to make sure I understand exactly the build that is happening in the server. I can actually execute that and run that locally. A lot of these other build tools have these kind of like configurable steps so you can make all these different things happen. And when something goes wrong, you're like, no way to debug that. So with an actual build script, I can run this entire build locally, make sure everything looks good, and then say, just do exactly that over there. And then it can work OK. All right, if I go to latest build, it should actually, oh, got some stuff going on. This AppFair supports SQL local DB, so we'll actually run my migrations, run those integration tests against those migrated databases. So we'll do like absolutely everything as part of it. Oh, look, it actually completed. So it said uploading artifacts to Contoso University Core 1.0.1 NuGet package, and it all succeeded. There are 21 passing tests, 1 unit test. Yay. I think it's like assert true, true, and we're good to go. All right, my artifacts, I can see, yep, that's the NuGet package I'm looking for. So the final piece of this puzzle here, AppFair has its own built-in NuGet feed. I don't have to use that. Is anyone here using like mygit, progit? That's the only one I know of. So there's also hosted options for NuGet feeds. Most build servers also have their own ability to host NuGet feeds. So it doesn't really matter where your NuGet feed is. But I do have to tell my deployment provider where to pull those pieces from. So I'm going to switch now over to my continuous deployment tool, which is going to be, any guesses? Oh, no, I just put it up there. Crap. Ruined it. Octopus Deploy. Octopus Deploy is going to be the tool that manages the automated deployment of my application into production. So the very first thing I need to do is tell Octopus Deploy where it should look for packages to deploy out into production. So over here in the library, I can tell it, add a new feed. And this is going to be AppFair. And that's the URL I have from earlier. Let me go and save and test it. The package name I can look for is Contoso University Core. No, it's not that. That's the one. And it should find, oh, I misspelled it. Jesus. There we go. Ah, okay. It found the package there. So now what I want to do is set up my deployment to deploy to Azure based on this package. Now, one thing I also need to do is turn off the automated deployment from Azure. It probably tried to deploy and did some. Oh, yep, it did that. So let's not do this anymore. I'll disconnect that. Yes. We don't want this Git-based deployment doing anything anymore whatsoever. And yes. Oh, there we go. Yes, there we go. The next thing I need to do is there's a little piece I need to do in the security side on the database. I'm going to want to run migrations as part of my deployments. And right now, my database is only allowing connections from basically inside the portal to be able to run any kind of script. So what I want to do is configure it to say, you can go ahead and run scripts from this machine, which is where I'm running Octopus deploy. So I'm going to add this IP. And that shouldn't take very long. OK. And so the very final piece I need to do is go back to Octopus deploy and set up my new project. I'm going to set up, first of all, I have my production environment. Octopus deploy has a concept of different environments. So if I have like a dev, test, QA, production environment, we can set those up with each of those different steps and machines that could be part of it. But the final thing I need to do is set up my project to actually deploy this piece out. We're going to call it, of course, Contoso University Core, because I'm not that. And add our first step. And our first step is going to be deploying an Azure web app. Deploy. The package feed is going to be from AppVeyor. So this different NuGet package feed here. The package ID is going to be Contoso University. Yep, there it is. And finally, I have to tell it which account to use to deploy. So my MSDN accounts and the web app it's going to deploy to. So this one right here. And that is all I'm going to do for now. So let me hit save. OK, so now that I have my deployment set up here, I can say I have all my changes are good. So let's go ahead and create a new release that represents this new version that I just pushed out. So 1.0.1. I'm going to hit save against the 1.0.1 version of my application. And I'm going to say go ahead and deploy to production. Now, one thing this will do, I've already got my pre-built application in that NuGet package. It knows how to take that NuGet package and push it out to production. But there's an important thing we wanted to do as well, migrate that database. So the very last thing that I'll show you is in my application, I have this special file down here that's deploy.ps1. And when I have a deploy.ps1 file as part of my final NuGet package, it's going to run that as part of my deployment. And so what this will do is run my migrations against my deployed environment. Ooh, I forgot something. Some of these deployment parameters. OK, so I don't want to hard code in connection strings and things like that as part of this. So I can do as part of my configuration is introduce some variables that when it runs the deployment, it's going to set those values as part of my deployment. So the first one is going to be connection string. Hello. Oh, there we go. Connection string. And the value is my cheat sheet over here. Cheat sheet. And I think I had one other one, which was the deployment environment. So if I have different scripts I need to run for different environments, that's what that piece is right there. Deployment environment is just prod. OK. Now, since I've introduced new variables, I actually need to create a new release to capture those variables. So I'm going to just call it 1.2.01-1 against that same NuGet package. Hit save. And I'm going to go ahead and deploy now this to production. Deploy now. No, it will not. So the question is, will that connection string update the configuration settings in Azure, or Azure as we say it in Texas? No, it will not. So as part of our configuration for that step, we can also say, go ahead and make that change to app settings, and this is the value I want to give it. We're butting up against time, so I won't walk through that exact scenario, but absolutely, I would do that as part of my deployment process. Oh, look, it did something. Successfully downloaded package. If I look at the entire application here, it looks like it did everything I wanted to do. So let me go ahead and refresh and see if it did its thing. So we should see a middle name pop up there eventually. And so as part of that deployment, it's going to be pushing my package out as well as running that deploy script as part of it, migrating to my database, adding that new middle name field, and now I can have this kind of holy grail environment where I have my database changes living alongside my application, pushing out all the way to production. So we can see right. Right. Oh, yes, thank you. Well, this is taking forever. OK, well, that's going to come up eventually. I don't want to sit and wait here forever because it's going to take forever. Just to bring everything back together again, I've taken an application that just did right-click deploy from Visual Studio. I introduced the concept of Git-based deployments through Azure, configuring it in here. Had the problem of needing to migrate my database. So now I've taken my application, introduced continuous integration, packaging, and continuous delivery all the way out from my original right-click deploy all the way out to production. So thank you very much. We'll just wait for this to keep spinning. It'll keep spinning because it's free. Oh, 500. I'll fix that later. Anyway, thank you very much. I'm butting up on time. So if you have any questions, I'll be sticking around. Otherwise, have a great rest of the conference. Thank you very much.